Name's Marcus, and I work as a paranormal investigator, or at least, that's what I call myself now. But this story happened before I ever thought about that as a career. Back in 2016, I was just a guy who liked exploring abandoned buildings with a camera. My friend Derek and I had heard about Riverside State Hospital, about 40 minutes outside the city. It had been closed since 1993, and the building was still standing, mostly intact. We got permission from the property owner, or at least, Derek said he did. I never actually saw the paperwork. We showed up on a Friday night around 9 p.m. The place was massive. 5 stories, red brick, windows boarded up with plywood that had turned gray and soft. The main entrance doors were chained, but there was a side entrance where the lock had been cut years ago. Derek went in first. I followed. The smell hit me immediately. Not decay exactly. More like old paper, dust, and something chemical that made my throat tight. We both had flashlights. The hallway was wider than I expected. Institutional, with linoleum that had warped in places where water had gotten in. Wheelchairs were still there, just pushed against the walls. Medical charts scattered on a desk in what used to be an intake room. Normal stuff for an abandoned hospital, but seeing it in person makes you feel something. You're standing in a place where people were really suffering. We spent the first hour on the ground floor, filming, taking photos. Nothing unusual. Honestly, it was just sad. A recreation room with a piano that was severely out of tune. Patient beds with mattresses that had partially collapsed. By 11 p.m., we decided to set up in the 3rd floor psychiatric ward for the night. We'd brought sleeping bags, a bunch of battery-powered equipment, some food. The plan was to document anything strange and see if we could capture evidence of, ghosts. I didn't really believe in ghosts, but I enjoyed the exploration. The psychiatric ward was different from the rest. It had one long hallway with rooms on both sides, maybe 20 of them. The doors were all open. Some had beds still in them. Others were empty except for stains on the floor. There was a nursing station in the middle, with a cabinet full of old prescription bottles, none of them labeled anymore. The glass on the cabinet was cracked. We chose a room with no bed, easier to set up, and arranged our gear. Derek set up his camera on a tripod pointing at us while we slept. I had my phone on record in case anything happened. We both agreed to keep our flashlights close. Around midnight, we settled into our sleeping bags and just waited. For the first hour or so, we talked quietly. Derek asked if I was nervous. I said no, which was mostly true. It was just an old building. Then around 1 a.m., Derek fell asleep. I didn't blame him. It was boring, which was fine by me, but that's when I started noticing small things. First, there was a sound from down the hallway. Not loud, just regular. Like someone was moving through the rooms systematically. Opening a door, moving inside, closing it. Opening the next door, moving inside, closing it. Over and over. The sound of the doors themselves was distinct, this particular creaking sound that the hinges made. I turned my head toward the hallway, listening. The sound continued for maybe 30 seconds, then stopped. I told myself it was the building settling. Old buildings make noise. Maybe another 20 minutes passed. Then I heard it again. The same pattern. Door, movement, door closing. But this time, it was coming from the opposite end of the hallway, and it was moving closer. I sat up in my sleeping bag. I reached over and nudged Derek awake. "What?" he whispered. "You hear that?" He listened. The sound had stopped again. "No, what am I listening for?" There was a sound. Someone moving through the rooms. Like what? I don't know. Like someone's going through each room. Derek didn't seem concerned. Probably just pipes or something. Old buildings have weird sounds. He lay back down and was asleep again within 2 minutes. I stayed awake though. I kept my flashlight off so my eyes would stay adjusted to the dark. The room was very dark. I could barely see Derek next to me. I couldn't see the hallway clearly either, just shapes. Maybe 30 minutes later, I heard a different sound. Footsteps. Actual footsteps. Walking down the hallway, not slowly, but not running. Just walking. A steady pace. They came from one end of the hallway and went toward the other. I heard them clearly. The sound of someone moving through the space we were in. I grabbed Derek's shoulder harder this time. He woke up faster, annoyed. "Someone's walking through the hallway," I said, keeping my voice low. He raised his head, listening. We both sat there in silence. The footsteps didn't come back. Derek sighed. Marcus, there's nobody here. We're the only ones in the building. We came through the only entrance. We checked it. Then, what was that? Pipes. The wind. Something. Not a person. He lay back down. Go to sleep. But I didn't sleep. I stayed awake for the next 3 hours, listening. And what was weird was that the footsteps came back, but only when Derek was asleep. When I heard them, I'd wake him up, and he'd tell me I was being paranoid. Then I'd stay awake longer, more alert. The footsteps kept happening, in different parts of the hallway. Sometimes fast, sometimes slow, never coming into our room, just passing by. By around 4 a.m., I was exhausted and unsettled. I told Derek I wanted to leave. He was frustrated but agreed. We packed up our gear quickly, left the hospital, and drove home in near complete silence. The weird part, and this is what stuck with me, was what I found later when I looked at the footage from Derek's camera. I reviewed the video the next day. It showed our sleeping bags, the dark room, exactly what I expected. The audio was clear. You could hear the sounds I'd heard. The doors, the footsteps, all of it on the recording. But in the video, you could also see something I hadn't noticed in the dark. In the hallway, visible through the open door of our room, there were shapes. Passing by. Not clear shapes. Just dark outlines that moved through the space where we'd heard the footsteps. They never slowed down. They never acknowledged us. They just moved through the hallway, over and over. I haven't been back to Riverside. Derek and I don't really talk about it anymore. But that recording is still on my hard drive. Sometimes I look at it again just to confirm that I'm not misremembering what I saw. Follow it. I wasn't in a hurry. As I turned onto a smaller side street, I noticed the buildings getting progressively more run down. Boarded windows, peeling paint, cars that looked like they hadn't moved in months. The GPS told me to turn left into one of the parking lots. A 3-story complex painted this faded cream color that had gone almost gray with age. It said I'd arrived at my destination, which made no sense. I checked the address on the GPS. It was my address. My actual address. The same numbers. But I lived on the opposite side of the city, in a newer building with actual maintenance. I sat in my car for a minute, engine running, staring at this building. The sun was getting lower, and there was something about the light hitting the concrete that made it look almost sickly. I decided to get out and look around. Stupid, I know, but I was curious. The parking lot had maybe 6 spaces. Only 2 cars were parked there, both looking like they hadn't been moved recently. I walked toward the entrance. The front door was one of those glass doors with a crack running diagonally across it, held together by tape. Through it, I could see a narrow hallway with a row of mailboxes on one wall and stairs at the far end. I pulled the door open. It stuck a little, like the frame had warped. The hallway was darker than the outside, even though there was still daylight. The air smelled stale, like old carpet and something else. Something like cooking that had happened a long time ago and never quite left. I walked to the mailboxes and looked for the apartment number that matched mine. 307. I found it, the 3rd box from the left. There was a nameplate next to it. My name. My actual full name printed on a small white label. I remember my hands started shaking a little. I'm not someone who scares easily, but something about seeing my name in that building, in that hallway, made my stomach feel tight. I climbed the stairs. They creaked under my feet. The 2nd floor hallway was identical to the first. The same faded carpet, the same buzzing fluorescent light that looked like it was dying. I kept going to the 3rd floor. Apartment 37 was at the end of the hallway. The door was painted a dark green, and it looked newer than the rest of the building, like it had been replaced recently. I stood in front of it for maybe 30 seconds just looking at it. I didn't have keys for this place. I had no reason to think anything was inside, but I could hear something. A sound. It was faint, but it was definitely coming from inside. It sounded like someone moving around. Footsteps, maybe, or something being moved across a floor. And then I heard running water, like a shower or a sink. Someone was in there. I knocked. I don't know why I did that. Some instinct took over. The water stopped immediately. The footsteps I'd heard, if that's what they were, stopped. There was just silence. I waited about 10 seconds. Nothing. I knocked again, harder this time. I heard footsteps approaching the door. They were slow, deliberate. Someone was coming to answer. I felt my pulse in my neck. The footsteps stopped right on the other side of the door. I could sense someone looking through the peephole. We were both standing there, me on one side, them on the other, probably less than a foot apart. Then the footsteps backed away. Slowly. I heard them retreat deeper into the apartment. I knocked again. "Hello," I said. "I'm sorry to bother you. I think there's been some kind of mistake with my address." No response. I stood there for another minute, then turned and walked back down the hallway. I was doing the math in my head, trying to figure out if this was some kind of identity theft thing, or if someone had fraudulently registered an apartment in my name. It didn't quite fit, either explanation. I got back in my car and drove home the normal way, using my memory instead of GPS. The whole drive I was thinking about the sound of those footsteps, how deliberate they were, how they'd stopped right at the door. I didn't go to the police. I didn't really know what I'd report. A person in an apartment. No crime in that. An address mix-up? Happens all the time. But I did something I've never done before or since. When I got home, I looked at my phone, at all my photos. I printed out a picture of myself, just a simple headshot, and I put it in my wallet. The reason I did that was because, standing outside that apartment door, listening to those footsteps retreat, I'd realized something that made my skin go cold. The person on the other side of that door had heard my voice, and they'd chosen not to respond. They'd turned around and walked away, which meant they knew who was out there. They knew what I sounded like. I kept that photo in my wallet for 3 years. I looked at it sometimes to remind myself what I actually looked like, to confirm that I was still me. Because I couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere across the city, in that faded building on Millbrook Avenue, there was someone who looked exactly like me. Someone who'd chosen not to answer the door. Potential care for elderly patients with dementia. I'd do my rounds, check that doors were secure, make sure nothing looked damaged or out of place. By 4 a.m., I was sitting at the security desk reading, waiting for morning staff to arrive. Second night was when things started getting strange. Nothing dramatic, just small things. I was walking the east corridor around midnight. This was the dementia unit, and I noticed one of the room doors was open. Room 247. I checked my notes. The resident, a man named Gerald, was supposed to be in that room. I looked inside. The bed was made. No Gerald. I immediately checked with the night nurse, Sarah, and she looked genuinely confused. She said Gerald had been asleep when she did her 10 p.m. rounds. She walked with me to the room, and Gerald was there, in the bed, sleeping. But when we checked the hallway camera, the timestamp showed that door open at 11:47 p.m., and we didn't see anyone walking out. Sarah assumed the camera had glitched. But here's the thing. I remembered looking at that door when I passed by at 11:30. I'm pretty sure it was closed then. I didn't think much of it, though. Same night, around 2 a.m., I was in the South Unit, the psychiatric ward, walking past the common room. Through the window in the door, I could see someone sitting in one of the chairs facing the corner, just sitting there in the dark. I opened the door and turned on the lights. The chair was empty. I checked my notes. Nobody was supposed to be out of their room at that hour. I did a room count on that unit, and all patients were accounted for, asleep. I didn't report it. I know that sounds irresponsible, but I didn't want to seem paranoid on my second night. Third night, I was starting to feel uneasy about the place. There was something about the building that felt different after dark. Not evil or anything theatrical like that. Just tense. Like the air was thicker. I mentioned it to Sarah when she came in for her shift, and she nodded like she understood exactly what I meant. She didn't elaborate. Around 1:15 a.m., I was doing my North Unit rounds, the locked psychiatric ward. This unit had 12 beds. As I walked past the windows of each room, checking on residents, I started counting. 1, 2, 3. I got to 9, then paused. The 10th room was occupied, but I didn't recognize the patient. I've got a pretty good memory for faces, and I had reviewed the resident roster. This person didn't match anyone on the list. They were lying down, so I couldn't see them clearly, but they had dark hair and were facing the wall. I went straight to Sarah. I told her there was someone in room 10 North that wasn't on the roster. She went pale. Not like worried pale, like she'd seen a ghost pale. She walked with me back to the room, and the bed was empty. She checked her paperwork, and sure enough, room 10 was marked as unoccupied. Sarah sat down in the hallway and told me that Blackwood had lost a patient in that room in 2004. A psychiatric patient named Marcus. Yeah, same name as me, who died during a restraint incident. The official report said it was an accident. Sarah said there'd been staff present when it happened, but the incident reports had disappeared from the file. The patient's family wanted an autopsy, but the facility fought it. Eventually, the family ran out of money for lawyers and stopped pursuing it. Room 10 had been left empty since then. No patient had been assigned to it in 15 years. I didn't work another shift. I called Rebecca the next morning and told her it wasn't working out. She didn't ask why. She just said, okay, and processed my final check. When I picked it up, she handed me an envelope with my payment and something else. A photocopy of the 2004 incident report guide. She didn't explain why. She just told me not to come back. I've never gone back to that facility. I don't know if what I saw had an explanation or not. Maybe it was glitches and coincidences and tricks of a tired mind. But I'm not interested in finding out. The wall looked recent, maybe 1990s based on the mortar condition. I started spending my lunch breaks mapping the basement systematically. I'd mark the walls with pencil and measure distances. The tunnel system was asymmetrical. The space between the outer wall of the Morrison's structural footprint and the actual walls of the basement passages didn't match. There was approximately 15 feet unaccounted for on the east side. Then I found the access point. It was behind a water heater in the mechanical room, a small metal door about 3 feet tall, bolted shut. The bolts were rusted but movable. I didn't open it that day. I stood there for 20 minutes, just staring at it, knowing I should leave it alone. The rational part of me understood that some things are sealed for a reason, and that reason usually isn't good. I didn't mention it to Dennis. For the next 2 weeks, I went back to that door 7 times. Each time I told myself I was doing a safety inspection. Each time I didn't touch it. But I started noticing other details. The water heater it was bolted behind had been installed in 1996, before that door was sealed. Someone had deliberately put the heater in front of the entrance as additional obstruction. On a Tuesday night, I was alone in the basement running diagnostics on the HVAC system. It was around 11 p.m. The hotel was quiet. I had the master keyring on my belt. I went to the mechanical room. The door was already unbolted. I'm not exaggerating when I say my stomach turned. I know what I saw. I'd counted those bolts. 4 of them. They were gone. Not lying on the ground. Not loosened. Just absent. The door hung slightly ajar, and there was fresh dust on the floor from where they'd likely been lying. Dust that had been disturbed and moved toward the opening, as if someone had swept it inside. I called Dennis. He didn't answer. I called the Pittsburgh Police non-emergency line and explained that I'd found something at my workplace that concerned me. The dispatcher was patient, but clearly uninterested. She said I could file a report, but there wasn't an active crime, just a maintenance concern. I should contact my employer. The next morning, Dennis came down with me to the mechanical room. The door was closed. The bolts were back. All 4 of them. Rusted, corroded bolts were now fastened firmly in place. You said it was unbolted? Dennis asked. He wasn't asking for clarification. His tone had shifted. He was testing whether I'd really seen it, or whether I was the kind of guy who'd lose his job over nonsense. It was, I said. I'm sure. The water heater's been here since '96, he said. I've been with this hotel for 11 years. That door's always been locked like that. Maybe you misremembered it last night. Hard to keep track of details on night shifts. But he didn't look at me when he said it. He looked at the bolts. I gave my 2 weeks notice that day. Dennis didn't ask why. He just nodded and said he'd processed the paperwork. On my last night, I was in the basement around midnight, finishing a few things. I heard something from inside the wall. Not an echo, not pipes. It was a rhythmic thumping, like someone was hitting the wall from the other side, directly behind where that sealed door was. Once, twice, 3 times. Then nothing. I packed my tools and left. I don't know what's in that space. I don't want to know. But I think whatever's in there knows it's there. And I think Dennis knows that too. The water heater in front of the door wasn't placed there by accident. Neither were those bolts. And when I wasn't looking closely enough, they were removed by someone, or something, that wanted to make sure I understood it was an option. I still have nightmares where I actually opened that door.